Welcome. We are here for yet another one of our late night conversations, early evening, I guess, if you're on the West Coast. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We are going to have a great chat. I am here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. We got a lot to talk about. Let's go.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you. Got those spring allergies still. It is March, soon to be April. I'm really glad to be here with our community. We do great stuff here. I really appreciate all of you and the new folks, too. We've had a lot of new folks pour in this month. Glad to have you. Glad you're here. We're obviously talking about a lot of important things on this channel, and I'm really, really glad to have this community of people. Look, if I wanted to do this by myself, right, I would film it and upload it afterwards, but I'm here to engage with all of you. I'm watching the chat constantly. We have our running jokes. We have our roll call, and it's all really, really great. So I'm really, really glad that you're here. Now, for those of you that may be new, the way we do things here is I give my opening remarks about whatever it is I want to talk about this evening. I think you all know what that is for today. There's been a recent news item. I give my opening remarks, and then from there, after I give my opening remarks, we do a roll call. We find out who's on the other side of the camera, who's watching. That's always exciting because we have people from a lot of different places watching, a lot of different corners of the United States and the world who are tuning in. It's a very diverse audience that we've got here. And then after we do the roll call, I answer your questions for the remainder of the show. That's right. The remainder of the show is me answering your super chat questions on YouTube, your Rumble rant questions on Rumble, and your Rockfin tips on Rockfin. So if you are watching right now and there's something you would like me to address, get your super chat ready, get your Rumble rant ready, get your Rockfin ready. I'll be tracking of those as they come in. And then from there, I will be answering them. You all make the second half of the show happen. The second half of the show is all you. It is all you. So give me something good to react to. Get me talking in the second half. That is my challenge to my audience. Now, that also brings me to, before we get going here, another announcement. An announcement just to throw out. For those of you who may not be aware, the Center for Political Innovation is having a 4-day national educational workshop in Vermont, and it's going to be awesome. It'll be 4 days of anti-imperialist education, talking about socialism and anti-imperialism and getting to know people of a similar perspective. So you really ought to be there. We would love to have you. If you're a member of the Center for Political Innovation, if you're a friend or an ally, we'd love to have you join us. There's a link down below in the description. Drop in a link in the chats. Sign up. We'd love to have you join us for 4 days in Vermont. It'll be nice time out there in nature. You'll get to know different members of our group, different people in our community. It'll be a lot of fun. So sign up today. Sign up and join us April 26th through April 29th for our 4-day national educational workshop in Vermont. It's going to be very awesome. We are not building a social media brand here. We are building a real community of solidarity and anti-imperialist organization and movement. So if you'd like to join our in real life community and be part of our 4-day exciting educational workshop, register today. We'd love to have you. So that was just a quick announcement I wanted to get out of the way. So now just a quick reminder, first the opening remarks, then the roll call, then I answer your questions for the rest of the night. So give me something to react to in the second half of our show. Get me talking, get me going. That is my challenge to you. Give me some super chats, rumble rants, or Rockfin tips to react to. Well, for the last 12, 13, 14 hours, I have had a certain song going through my head. And you may not know why. You may not be familiar with the song, and you may not know why. But if you're astute to American cinematic history, you will know why I've had this song going through my head the last 12 hours. Here we go. Anyhow, so yes, now you all can have this song going through your head for the next few days as well. Now, that song is called the Colonel Bogey March, and it was written around the time of World War I. It's just a British military song, and it has absolutely nothing to do with bridges falling down, except that in 1957, Hollywood decided to make an epic movie out of a famous novel about World War II. And I think they wanted to save money. So instead of commissioning somebody to write an original song for the movie, Hollywood decided to use that song as the theme for their 1957 movie, The Bridge on the River Kwai.
The adventure they'll all be talking about, as long as the motion picture screen has the power to thrill, to excite, to amaze. The winner of 7 Academy Awards and 27 international awards. From the makers of Lawrence of Arabia, The Bridge on the River Kwai.
I am the commanding officer of this camp. You British prisoners have been chosen to build a bridge across the River Kwai. If you work hard, you will be treated well. But if you do not work hard, you will be punished.
Anyhow, so the movie came out in 1957. It was a Hollywood blockbuster. It was based on a novel, and it's called The Bridge on the River Kwai. And the story basically tells of a group of British soldiers that are taken as prisoners of war in World War II by Japan. And they are taken as prisoners of war, and the Japanese are not honoring the Geneva Convention. They're, torturing them and treating them horrifically. Awful conditions in the prisoner of war camp. And what they make the prisoners do is build a bridge. And these prisoners, they spend all this time building this bridge. And building the bridge becomes the only thing that keeps them going, right? They're in this awful prisoner of war camp. Their conditions are horrible. But every day they're building the bridge, and building the bridge becomes like their purpose in life. It becomes their meaning, right? Is that they are building this bridge. And so they build the bridge, and they're getting ready to finally drive the first train over the bridge. And the British military shows up to blow up the bridge, because they're in a war, right? And it's a Japanese bridge these prisoners of war have been building. The British Army shows up to blow up the bridge, and the leader of the British military ends up fighting against the British military to try and stop the bridge from being blown up. Why? Because he's become so attached to the bridge, and his men have become so committed to building the bridge that even though they're loyal British citizens, even though they're not on the side of Japan, they just don't want to see the bridge that they've dedicated themselves to building. They don't want to see it destroyed. And so they end up fighting against their fellow British soldiers to try and keep the bridge up. The movie is obviously touching on the fact that we all need a purpose in life. We all need something to believe in. And especially if you're in awful circumstances, if you're unhappy, we all need a purpose in life. And if you become attached to something, you can suddenly, change your moral convictions. It can change your loyalties. And even though these men were loyal British citizens, and even though they're very opposed to the Japanese, they are so determined to defend this bridge that their whole life had revolved around building. They end up betraying their country or something like that. That's the plot of the film. Now, what's interesting, and this is why I've been thinking of it. So the novel Bridge on the River Kwai, it ends with the train, that's going to go over the bridge gets knocked off the tracks, but the British soldiers defend the bridge and it doesn't blow up. And that's how the novel ends. However, Hollywood was making the movie, and Hollywood said, "There's no way in hell we're going to make a blockbuster movie without a big, epic, giant explosion at the end of the movie." So even though the book ends with the bridge being defended, and it points to the irony of the British soldiers fighting against their own, soldiers, their own country folk on the side of their captors to defend the bridge, Hollywood is just like, no, the bridge has to blow up. The bridge must explode. It's Hollywood, right? They needed to have an epic explosion. So this is the final scene, the final moment of the Hollywood epic Bridge on the River Kwai. The last 46 seconds of the movie. Spoiler alert. Obi-Wan Kenobi did not use his Jedi powers to save the bridge. You are correct. And of course, the reason I've been thinking of that is because of something that just happened in Baltimore. This happened at roughly 1:30 a.m. local time last night. This is the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, Maryland.
Yes, sir. Our agents going to arrive over here at the FTA headquarters. R62 is around your location now. He just arrived. You can leave ahead.
Yeah, that's what happened. So as you can see, the barge, the ship with a lot of goods that are being transported, was supposed to go under the bridge, and it missed, and it hit one of the what do you call that? One of the posts that are in the water holding it up, and it apparently they were saying Mayday, Mayday. They were warning people, and it hit the ledge there, and there she blows. There she went. And that was that. That was the end of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, Maryland. And I am not a physicist, okay? I am not a physicist. So I'm just giving you my reaction as a dude who knows absolutely nothing about engineering, about building bridges, like literal bridges, about physics and architecture and structure. I'll be honest with you all. I do not understand any of that. So I'm just giving you my basic reaction, which is, okay, so as you can see, the barge, it hits one of the posts there. It's holding it up. It hits it. And as you can see, it knocks it out. And then the whole thing just completely comes apart. Right? I mean, it just completely falls down like a house of cards. And I'm looking at this, right? I'm looking at this. So one post got hit here, right? And I mean, I got to say, I know that that's a big ship that hit it, okay? But it wasn't going at like epic speed, okay? I mean, that barge full of cargo is not going at like warp speed. It's not like speeding at it like faster than a speeding bullet, right? I mean, it's just kind of rolling up on the bridge. Here he goes. Oh, and boom, the whole thing falls down. I mean, it's almost like a house of cards, right? It's like, you knock one thing and then the whole thing just collapses, and the bridge doesn't just fall down over here. It falls down over there and everything. I mean, it just comes apart. I mean, look at this. I mean, the one turret or whatever it is that's holding it up, and the whole thing just completely, I mean, all it takes is one little post to go down, to get bumped into by the big ship that's not going at epic speed. That big ship is not speeding through the water. It's just kind of floating through. Oh, boom, the whole thing. Kaboom, kaboom, kaboom. I mean, it's just, and then the other side goes down. And I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, is the bridge really that fragile? I mean, I don't know anything about physics, okay? I'm not like some kind of, genius here, but it's like, I look at this and I'm just like, okay. Is is the bridge really this fragile that, like, I mean, why did the other parts of it not stay up, right? Maybe this middle, it would sag in the middle or something, but I mean, I don't understand why one turret goes down and the whole thing just completely collapses. I don't get it. Okay? And it makes me feel like this bridge wasn't really built on very secure foundations. If you know, all it takes is a bump from a ship that's not going very fast, right? And that's all it takes, right? And you know, and then the whole thing just completely collapses. I mean, look at this. I mean, it just takes a bump from a ship and the whole thing just completely falls apart. Something's wrong here. Now, you know, maybe somebody who knows more about this than I can tell me exactly why this happened. But if this is all it took to have that level of epic destruction and death, I mean, people died, and we don't want to make light of that. You know, we don't want to make light of that at all. We want to give condolences to their families. You know, there were cars on the bridge at the time that it went under, right? That went into the ocean. I mean, my God, there were people on the ship that got hurt. I mean, this is very bad. And there were some heroic, you know, workers who ran out and started blocking traffic and saved people's lives. Thank God. But I'm looking at this and I'm like, this was a very, very fragile bridge. I am sure I have driven over this bridge before, right? I am sure I have driven over this bridge because I frequently go back and forth from Washington, D.C. to New York City. I used to take the Chinatown bus every weekend when I was working in D.C., when I was first working in D.C., when I was working with RT back in 2016. I would take the Chinatown bus every weekend back up to New York. I am sure I rode over this bridge, and thousands and thousands of people go over the Francis Scott Key Bridge every day. So this bridge was that insecure, right? You know, I mean, yeah, who the F built this bridge? It fell like a house of cards. Yeah, good question. That's what I'm asking myself, right? I am looking at this and I say something's not right. Now you can say, oh, this isn't a big deal. Caleb, you don't understand the physics. It was a really big ship and okay, fine, right? And the ship was going the wrong way and all that. But something just doesn't look right. I just feel like this shouldn't be happening, right? It shouldn't be this easy for a bridge to just completely wipe out, right? I mean, isn't part of the way they design these things that, like, you know, one of the turrets or whatever can break and then the rest of the bridge stays up, right? I mean, don't they design things so that they don't just completely wipe out? I mean, it's like somebody went up to it and went, and then the whole thing just completely, you know, completely fell apart. I'm asking questions here. As somebody who knows nothing about engineering, as somebody who knows nothing about that, I'm saying something's not right about this. Something stinks here. Something stinks here. And part of the reason that I would say something stinks is because a stinky, smelly, awful human being immediately grabbed the spotlight afterwards, right? One of the most favorite human beings, the greatest, most amazing human beings to have ever lived, a great American hero, somebody that we all just love. Sarcasm, sarcasm, sarcasm. Pete Buttigieg.
This guy woke all of us up early this morning, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I want to thank Senator Cardin and the entire delegation for their leadership. They have been on this from the first moments. And as the senator mentioned, and I'll say more about this in a moment, we'll be needing to work together to make sure that we render all of the support that is needed at the federal level. I want to recognize the leadership of Governor Moore, who was already wide awake and hard at work when I reached him in the middle of the night. We just had a very informative briefing with his extraordinary leadership team. And I was moved to see the partnership between state as well as county and city personnel led by the county executive and the mayor working hand in glove with us and with our sister federal agencies. And if there's one thing I have to say today, it is a note of gratitude for.
Okay. That is the Secretary of Transportation of the United States, Pete Buttigieg. Folks, who was the last Secretary of Transportation? I don't know. I actually don't know. Generally, the Secretary of Transportation in the United States is not somebody that we all know. It's not a household name. It's not a celebrity. But they gave the job to presidential candidate and former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg. And now we all know who he is. And, you know, he's gay, you know, and he reminds us of that constantly. You know, he's a gay mayor of a town in Indiana. We're a college town in Indiana, no less. And he ran for president and lost because he was not very popular and people find him to be rather fake. His eyes don't move. He comes across as kind of a robot. There's something a little bit off about him, but he's the Secretary of Transport. And, you know, here he is grabbing the spotlight, and we're supposed to all like be in awe of his leadership and how he's handling this situation. Keep in mind, under this guy's watch, not only did we have the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse, we also had the East Palestine train derailments. Do you remember the train derailments? They also happened on his watch. If anything, Pete Buttigieg should be famous for sucking at his job, because with him as Secretary of Transport, American transport has fallen to pieces. However, that is not how mainstream media has portrayed this. And I mean, let's proceed.
For the extraordinary and courageous work of the first responders, some of whom are in that cold water right now, some of whom are from right here, some of whom have traveled in to render mutual aid, all of whom are...
Mutual aid? Did he just say mutual aid? I mean, don't you love it? Like, I mean, the woke language, right? They didn't, you know, come in to deliver emergency services. They didn't come to deliver, you know, assistance or relief to those who've been suffering. Mutual aid, like they're anarchists. They're anarchists, right? The Occupy Wall Street anarchist Black Lives Matter crew came in to give mutual aid, right? Mutual aid is the politically correct word you use because charity is apparently condescending and rude. You know, you're not allowed to call it charity. You call it mutual aid. So I guess, you know, the assistance that has been delivered to the people in this community who are devastated by this bridge falling apart has been delivered with rainbow flags and anarchy signs attached to it. They delivered mutual aid.
Are responding with extraordinary professionalism and whose work has already saved lives. And to those state, county, and local responders, I would add the extraordinary work of the United States Coast Guard. We should also recognize that this is an excruciating day for several families who went to bed last night having it be a normal night and woke up today to news that no one wants to receive. They are hoping and praying, and we are hoping and praying with them. We are all putting our arms around the community of Baltimore, and that is true for all of this country. I've even heard from counterparts as far away as the United Kingdom reaching out to express their support to the people of Baltimore. As been mentioned...
Like, what? I mean, I'm sure, yes, the video of the bridge collapsing went viral. I'm sure there's people as far away as Bangladesh that probably said, wow, that sucks, and sent nice messages. Like, somebody in Britain tweeted at you. Like, is that worth saying? I mean, this is just silliness.
Been in close contact with the governor, the mayor, county leadership, and the congressional delegation. And as President Biden has made clear, the federal government will provide all of the support that they need for as long as it takes. This is no ordinary bridge. This is one of the cathedrals of American infrastructure. It has been part of the skyline of this region for longer than many of us have been alive.
Maybe that's a little bit of a problem. Maybe it should have gotten, like, revamped at some point. Maybe there should have been some renovation on it. Maybe Maybe it should have been tested to make sure it was a little sturdier. Maybe the fact that this bridge is an ancient cathedral. Do you know how old those cathedrals are? The Cathedral of Notre Dame, etc. You know, maybe that is kind of the problem here. Maybe, just throwing this out there, maybe you should have touched up the goddamn bridge so this didn't happen. But continue.
So the path to normalcy will not be easy. It will not be quick. It will not be inexpensive. But
normalcy is not a word. Normalcy is a word that was invented by one of the presidents. It's actually, the term is normality. That's proper English. But normalcy was a word that was invented by, who was the president who invented that word? Warren G. Harding. He invented it for his presidential campaign. He said he was going to bring normalcy back to the United States, and people pointed out that good question. And, you know, we're taking note of the super chats that are coming in, but normalcy is not actually a word. It was invented by Warren G. Harding for his campaign. The proper English term is normality. So normality, right? Not normalcy.
We will rebuild together. In order to make sure that happens, the president's plan is to work with everyone here in order to rebuild this bridge and reopen this port, including our readiness as a department to approve emergency funding as soon as we receive that request. Meanwhile, our Maritime Administration will help with port, harbor, and supply chain operations. Our Federal Highway Administration will assist when it comes to the bridge itself and any ways that we can help ease roadway congestion for residents and commuters who can no longer use this major thoroughfare. The Federal Aviation Administration is even involved, working to keep the airspace above the bridge clear for emergency personnel. PHMSA, our Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration, is on the scene to help with any hazmat issues. And our newly stood up freight office is already at work preparing for supply chain impacts that we know are coming because of the importance of this port, not just to the Baltimore region, but really to the entire United States economy. We're going to be working closely with the National Transportation Safety Board as they lead their independent investigation and with the Coast Guard as they continue operations in the water. I've also spoken with Secretary Mayorkas, who's working to ensure that all DHS assets are integrated. So in many ways, our work is just beginning to rebuild this bridge and deal with impacts in the meantime, to reopen this port and deal with supply chain impacts in the meantime. But today we are most acutely focused on the emergency operations underway and on the families that have been impacted. I have no doubt that we will rebuild together and that Baltimore will come back stronger than ever before.
Thanks.
All right. So a little bit on that guy you just saw. I have to talk about this fellow. Pete Buttigieg. So Pete Buttigieg, interesting fact, his father is one of the key people who's responsible for what we now call the synthetic left. If you've ever been to college in the United States and taken anthropology, sociology, philosophy, political science, you have undoubtedly read Antonio Gramsci, right? It is a big thing in academia, Antonio Gramsci, right? It's a big, big part of academia. And who was Antonio Gramsci? Antonio Gramsci was an Italian communist who was put in prison by Mussolini. And from prison, he wrote a number of different essays. Mainly focused on arts and culture. I got the essays here somewhere. Where is it? I got the notebooks, the prison notebooks of Antonio Gramsci. Where are they? I have them somewhere. But, from prison, Antonio Gramsci, he wrote, here we go. He wrote a number of essays where he talked vaguely about art and culture, and this is the prison notebooks of Antonio Gramsci. And Why is it that academia, if you go to college in the United States or in Britain or in France, you are going to read Antonio Gramsci like crazy? And they're never going to tell you that Antonio Gramsci was a communist. And they're never going to tell you that Antonio Gramsci was a supporter of Stalin and the Soviet Union. Instead, you're going to read his essay and learn about hegemony and etc. What's going on here? Well, that's largely because of Pete Buttigieg's father. Pete Buttigieg's father is a professor who is responsible for publishing the writings of Antonio Gramsci. Pete Buttigieg's father, look it up. Pete Buttigieg's father is a Marxist academic, Joseph Buttigieg, a Maltese-American Marxist literary scholar and founder of the International Gramsci Society. This is very interesting. And we talk on here a lot about synthetic left and CIA manipulation of Marxist and leftist politics. Anybody who's interested in the whole thing about quote unquote cultural Marxism and the Frankfurt School should know who Pete Buttigieg's dad is. Joseph Buttigieg is the guy who made Gramsci a thing. Gramsci was not a thing until Pete Buttigieg's dad, with a lot of funding and backing from the U.S. National Endowment for the Humanities, etc., made Gramsci's prison notebooks a thing. We would not have Gramsci as a big academic thing, this Marxist who did not use Marxist language. We would not have him if it wasn't for Pete Buttigieg's father. So, right, if Pete Buttigieg's father is this very, very prominent Marxist, you would think that Pete Buttigieg must be, right? He must be a Bernie Sanders. He must be fighting for the working class. He must be a populist. Well, if you think that, you are wrong. Pete Buttigieg fought in Afghanistan on the side of U.S. imperialism. He is tied to intelligence agencies like you wouldn't believe. And when he was mayor of South Bend, Indiana, he was certainly no friend of the black community that was facing police brutality. South Bend, Indiana, it's in northern Indiana. It's a college town in northern Indiana that's part of Chicagoland, right? And what's interesting about South Bend, Indiana, it's almost a suburb of Chicago. It's technically over the border in Indiana, but it's part of what they call Chicagoland, this very big, it includes Michigan, it includes Illinois, it includes Chicago. It's this big concentration of cities and South Bend, Indiana, the northern part of Indiana that is part of Chicagoland, where you've got Notre Dame University. South Bend, Indiana is a very, very important city for U.S. intelligence. And you can Google this. Notre Dame University. It's Notre Dame University, I believe, right? That is in South Bend. Notre Dame. Notre Dame University in South Bend, Indiana. Who else is from South Bend, Indiana? Supreme Court Justice. Our latest Supreme Court Justice. She's from there as well. What is her name? The latest one? Amy Coney Barrett, the Supreme Court Justice. The latest Supreme Court Justice, a known conservative, neocon. She's also from South Bend, Indiana. It's been revealed that South Bend, Indiana, Notre Dame University is one of the top recruiting places for the CIA. At one point, the largest church in the world was very close to South Bend, Indiana. It was Hammond Baptist Church in Hammond, Indiana, the church of Reverend Jack Hyles. And they would have 3 services every Sunday at Hammond Baptist Church in the 1980s and 90s. They would have 3 church services every day. All of them would have 20,000 people at them, right? At one point, Hammond Baptist Church was the largest church in the world, and it was located near South Bend, Indiana. And Hammond Baptist Church was a key fundraiser. It was one of the original mega churches, and it was a key fundraiser for the Contras in Nicaragua that were fighting against socialism and against the Sandinista government. And South Bend, Indiana, is an important hub in the United States. And Pete Buttigieg became the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. And his mayorship was very important because Pete Buttigieg was gay and is gay, but he also calls himself a Christian. He is a Christian. He's Episcopalian, I believe. And the governor of Indiana was Mike Pence. And Mike Pence is an evangelical Christian who is very anti-LGBT. He wanted to pass a law that bakeries didn't have to make cakes for gay weddings if it opposed their religious beliefs, and that Pete Buttigieg's rise as a politician was largely seen as a response to Mike Pence. Mike Pence was a conservative from Indiana, a conservative governor of Indiana. Pete Buttigieg is a gay liberal mayor of Indiana. And Pete Buttigieg, certainly no friend of the Black community in South Bend. Certainly no friend of the working class. Certainly not a socialist or a populist. A pretty mainstream Hillary Clinton style Democrat. But he rose and ascended in politics as a response to the Trump administration. All very, very interesting. And many people thought that Pete Buttigieg's job as Secretary of Transport was kind of a snub from Joe Biden. People thought he might be vice president for Joe Biden. People thought he might get some kind of very important appointment, Secretary of State, something like that. That's interesting. Pete's main thing was trying to get Facebook to get an office in South Bend. But he ended up becoming the Secretary of Transportation. When we heard that Pete Buttigieg had been made Secretary of Transportation, we all thought, oh, well, that's not an important thing, right? That's like being, we'll be answering a lot of super chats when we get through this. That's like, being the dog catcher, or that's like being the head of the head of lettuce, right? I think I used to have a teacher. If you did something very well, he would say, wow, great job. You are now head of lettuce, right? It's a meaningless title. But Pete Buttigieg, as Secretary of Transportation, has gotten more attention, I think, than any Secretary of Transportation in my entire lifetime. I cannot think of another Secretary of Transportation that has gotten more attention than Pete Buttigieg. Why? Because the American transportation apparatus is falling apart. In East Palestine, trains were derailing, and now bridges are falling apart. And under the Biden administration, we're seeing the culmination of decades and decades of decay of American infrastructure. Just decade after decade. The roads have been decaying, the bridges have been decaying, the power plants have been falling apart, the railroads have gone into disrepair decade after decade after decade. All of the infrastructure of the United States has been decaying. And now it's coming to a head. And you'll remember that when Joe Biden first took office, he was going to fix this. He was going to do something about it. And it never happened. It didn't happen. In fact, under the Biden administration, the conditions have gotten worse. Our trains are derailing, and now our bridges are falling apart. Pete Buttigieg, the military hero and mayor, the man on the white horse who's supposed to save us all, the liberal response to Mike Pence, the son of the Marxist college professor who brought us Antonio Gramsci. He's been doing a shitty job, but yet he's in the spotlight. So I guess I'm just going to end this stream. These are just my reaction to the bridge collapsing in Indiana. I'm going to end with one observation, which I think is very fair. That Francis Scott Key Bridge, let's put it on one more time. This is the Francis Scott Key Bridge A ship bumped into it, and this happened, right? A ship bumped into the Francis Scott Key Bridge, and this happened. That's it, right? Ship hit it, boom. There we go. That's what happened. I want to show you another bridge. There is another bridge that exists somewhere in the world. And I want to show you this bridge. This is called the Kerch Bridge, or the Crimea Bridge. Yes, folks, that is the largest bridge in Europe. I'll show you another picture of it. The Kerch Bridge, or the Crimea Bridge. When Crimea voted to join with Russia, Russia decided that it was going to need to bring economic development to Crimea. And so they built the largest bridge in Europe, one of the biggest bridges in the entire world. And somebody in the chat said something that made me laugh. And I'm gonna put this on there. This is a huge bridge that Russia just built. And he says, I'm pretty sure if a cargo ship hit one of the pillars, it would collapse. Well, you don't know how wrong you are, my friend. The Ukrainians have bombed this bridge over and over and over again. The Ukrainians have sent drones to attack this bridge. The Ukrainians have done, this bridge has withstood all-out warfare, my friend, and it is still standing. This bridge has been able to withstand all-out direct attacks from a government that has been given billions and billions of dollars by NATO. They have attacked it over and over and over again, and it's still standing. While the Francis Scott Key Bridge got bumped by a cargo ship, and the whole thing fell down like a house of cards. I think it's worth pointing that out. This, folks, is a bridge of the future. This, folks, is a bridge from the anti-imperialist camp. A bridge connecting Russia with Crimea after Crimea joined with Russia and became a Russian republic. This is a bridge of the future. And the Francis Scott Key Bridge was a bridge of the past. And on that note, folks, that concludes my opening remarks for tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Let's do the roll call where I call you all out as I see you. Names and locations, names and locations. We find out who is on the other side of the camera, who's watching. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. We got Michael in Houston, Texas. We got Gabby in Chicago. Shout out to Gabby. We got George in Sydney, Rice from Adelaide, Australia, Nate in Chicago, Yas from Sweden, Ian in England, Dean in Australia, Jenny in Cincinnati. We got Palm Beach, John Clements, Bob in Troy, New York, Zach Bunch in Richmond, Virginia. We got Gonzalo in Argentina. We got Mexico. We got Mark Jones in Utica, New York. We've got Gary Sullivan in Oregon, Patrick in Maine, Margie in Central Ohio. Very, very, very good. Randy in Trinidad. Welcome. Chris in Scotland. Marsh in California. Bendigo, Australia, David Fox. Briggy in Pennsylvania. PJ in Florida. We got Paul in Canada. We got someone from Transylvania, Romania. We got Dave Newman in England. We got Wesley in the People's Republic of Manchester, Paul from the United Kingdom, Marty in Bogota. We got Mads in Boston. We got Greetings, Caleb, Diogenes. We got Sarah in Oregon, Krasner in Russia, John in Arizona, St. David's, Bermuda, Miro in Jordan, Sweden Bridge will go down, Bulgaria in Mexico. Welcome, welcome. A Bulgarian living in Mexico. Mosin in Denver, Colorado. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Who else is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. This is the roll call. On the Rumble, we've got Tampa, Florida. Suni in Tampa, Florida is with us. We got Jonathan Blazer saying, hey, comrades. Well, hey to you, Jonathan. Good to see you as always. We got John McCarthy out in Chicago. We got Rusty in the United Kingdom. Very, very good. On the Rockfin. Anyone on the Rockfin? All right. Rochdale, United Kingdom. Riz is with us. We got Southwest Germany, Eric Waller. We got Finn in Duluth. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We got Zach in Tennessee. Welcome, Zach. We got Jenny Boris from Fremont, California. The Seasoned Noob in China. We got Shet in Melbourne, Australia. Gleb in Cali. Welcome, Gleb. I met you at the last conference. Good to see you. We got Clifford in Los Angeles, Mohammed in San Diego, Jamie in St. Paul. Good times. We got Gabby. We got Chris and April in Salt Lake City. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We got Micah in Las Vegas. Welcome, 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 welcome. Good to have you all with us. Anybody else? Names and locations. We got Brian in London. We got a Canadian living in El Salvador. We got Rochdale. We got Mark in North Carolina. Wow. Everybody from all over, everywhere. This is always good. This is always great, folks. It is always great to be here with all of you. We are a great community of people. We got Nick in Tampa. Welcome, Nick. We got Bolivia, Arashai in Bolivia. Very, very, very good. Very, very, very good. We got Cherry Bear in Hong Kong. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Now, folks, at this point, Ryan in Kansas City. Can't forget Ryan. Folks, we got 4 super chats that have come in. I don't see any Rumble rants or Rockfin tips, but Sid in Northern Kentucky. Welcome, Sid. But I do want to let you all know that I do need your support to continue the work that I do on this YouTube channel. You know, I have to live in Manhattan, or I have to live in, not in Manhattan, but I live in Brooklyn. I have to live in New York City for my job, and rent here is too damn high. And I have this extra room so I can stream, and I'm not, fighting with my wife over the living room, and I can do my work in my home studio. but I do need your support. In order to continue the work of this channel, I do need your support. So the super chats that you all send, the Patreon support, speaking of which, I'll be doing a patron stream on the 1st of the month, like I always do. The Patreon support, that is all very, very helpful. And you are supporting this channel. So if you can send in a super chats, get me talking. If you can, buy the books that I publish, if you can, subscribe on Patreon or just send super chats and get me talking, that is greatly appreciated because it helps me keep the lights on here. It helps me keep the work that I'm doing going. It helps me continue to generate great content and keep coming back to talk to you all every night and do what I can do to come back here. So I need you all to think of super chats and get me talking. It is appreciated. I also do want to clarify, in case there's any confusion, I do not have access to CPI's money. The Center for Political Innovation, its funds are not handled by me. CPI is a nonprofit in the state of Oregon. CPI educational project. I don't, that if people donate to CPI or their CPI membership, that has nothing to do with me personally, right? If you support this channel, you're supporting me. If you support CPI, you're supporting the work of CPI, but the two are not connected. They are separate. The funds are separate at this point. So if you want to support me individually and my individual efforts, please send super chats. Give me something to talk about. Give me something to react to in the second half of the show. So I just want to throw that out there. And I guess on that note, I will start answering people's super chat questions that they have. Just taking a drink of water. So the first one, who the F built the bridge? It fell like a house of cards. Well, let's look it up. Who built the bridge? Francis Scott Key Bridge. Who built it? The Francis Scott Key Bridge was opened on March 23rd, 1977. It's not that old. I mean, 1977 is not that long ago. It's not like this was built in ancient India or something, right? The bridge, it cost $110 million. It was built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to honor Francis Scott Key. Traffic opened March 23rd, 1977. What else? It was financed in October of 1968. Bids for the constructing proposed Outer Harbor Tunnel was opened in 1970. Officials drafted alternative plans for a 4-lane bridge. General Assembly approved it in 1971. It would provide a route across the Baltimore Harbor for vehicles transporting hazardous materials, which are prohibited. The United States Coast Guard issued its bridge permit and approved the tunnel of the Army Corps of Engineers. Began in 1972, several years behind schedule with $33 million over budget. That's an expensive bridge. That's an expensive bridge that just fell down. President Joe Biden says he intends to ask Congress to fund the bridge's reconstruction and said all the resources are being made available in response to the incident. So there we go. April 2019, it announced the bridge would become a cashless toll facility. And EasyPass was using video tolling. That's interesting. But yeah, it looks like it was built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Looks like they spent quite a bit of money doing it. I also feel sorry for all the people who died. It's a tragedy. But I think, bridges being insecure across the United States is something that politicians have been warning us about for years, right? The Structurally Deficient Bridges Report of 2021. This is, I'm just linking you. This is infrastructurereportcard.org. What does it say? Infrastructure Report Card. This is the report on infrastructure bridges. It says, There are currently more than 617 bridges across the United States. That's a lot. 617,000 bridges across the United States. That's a lot of bridges. Currently, 42% of all bridges are at least 50 years old, and 46,154, or 77.5% of the nation's bridges, are considered structurally deficient, meaning that they are in poor condition. Unfortunately, 178 million trips are taken across these structurally deficient bridges every day. In recent years, though, as the average of America's bridges increases to 44 years, the number of structurally deficient bridges has continued to decline. However, the rate of improvement has been slowed. The estimate for the nation's backlog of bridge repair is needed $125 billion. $125 billion. Now, how many billions of dollars did we give Ukraine? I mean, in order to repair all of America's structurally deficient bridges, it would cost $125 billion. Now, how much has the USA given to Ukraine? How much has the USA given to Ukraine? There we go. Right? How much aid has been sent? Why don't we look into that? I'm seeing numbers like 75 billion. I'm seeing 113 billion. U.S. will send 300 million in weapons. Something to keep in mind. How much money is given to Israel every year? To Israel each year. How much aid is provided to Israel? Every year, Israel gets $3.3 billion every year. There we go. There we go. Worth noting, I think. Worth noting. All right. Next question. Obama's thaw. Why? Obama's Cuban thaw. Why? Why did that happen? Good question. I'll tell you why that happened. When Barack Obama was president of the United States, we know that the USA finally granted diplomatic recognition to the Cuban government. Now, why did that happen? Well, the first thing to be aware of, I think that is rather important in understanding why Barack Obama thawed diplomatic relations and established diplomacy with Cuba and lifted some of the sanctions on Cuba. The first thing to be aware of is that you'll notice that Barack Obama, at the same time that he was lifting sanctions on Cuba, going to Cuba and meeting with Raul Castro, etc., you'll notice that he was putting more sanctions on another country that's also in Latin America, and that country was Venezuela. Venezuela usurped, to some degree, the position that Cuba had. The reason that Cuba was designated as a state sponsor of terrorism by the U.S. government was because during the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, during the Cold War, Cuba was the center of support for the socialist revolutionary movements of Latin America. In Colombia, you had the FARC rebels that were fighting against the government of Colombia, and until the 1990s, they were armed and backed and trained by Cuba. The Sandinistas of Nicaragua, who, established a socialist government, had a revolution, 1978, 79, they were trained and backed and sponsored by Cuba. Cuba was kind of the center of spreading communist revolution throughout Latin America during the late Cold War years. And so the U.S. government designated it as a state sponsor of terrorism. Now, what the U.S. government always leaves out is these armed groups that Cuba was backing were all struggling against brutal military dictatorships. Nicaragua was not a democratic, free, open country. And then the communists just said, well, we hate freedom and we're going to start killing people. Nicaragua was a brutal dictatorship led by a guy named Somoza. and the people couldn't organize peacefully, and they couldn't run for office. And so because of that, the people of Nicaragua had no choice. They had to take up arms, and they had a civil war, and Cuba supported them in that, right? Colombia was also a brutal military dictatorship. And all throughout South and Central America in those years, there were a lot of brutal military dictatorships that were backed by the United States. And in response to those brutal military dictatorships, you had armed uprisings of the population led by communists, guerrilla wars fought by communists to try and overthrow them. And in Nicaragua, they were successful. In El Salvador, they were successful to some degree. But for the most part, they weren't very successful, right? They didn't take power. But Cuba was kind of the fountainhead supporting them. But then you'll recall the world has changed quite a bit since then, right? The world has changed a lot since the 1970s and 80s. And now Venezuela is the main center of anti-imperialism in Latin America. And Venezuela is on the South American mainland. Venezuela has a huge amount of oil, so it has a lot more economic power than Cuba has. And Venezuela, was able to help get the Sandinistas back in power in Nicaragua. It was able to help enable Evo Morales to become the president of Bolivia. It was able to push forward socialist and revolutionary movements in a lot of different parts of South and Central America. And Venezuela is a much bigger threat to U.S. imperialism than Cuba. Cuba is an island in the Caribbean, and Cuba has played a very, very heroic role. But Venezuela, because it's a larger country, because it's on the South American mainland, because it has a vital commodity called oil, Venezuela kind of usurped Cuba's role. Cuba was no longer the main center of anti-imperialism in Latin America. Venezuela was. And while the government under the leadership of Barack Obama was lifting sanctions on Cuba, it was escalating sanctions on Venezuela. And the sanctions on Venezuela got really, really bad in the final terms, in the final years of Obama's presidency. They were very, very bad because Hugo Chavez had died. The new president, Nicolas Maduro, had taken office, and there was a real hope on the part of the United States they could just squeeze Venezuela. They could create so much economic misery, they would overthrow the government. And during those years, you'll remember that Saudi Arabia worked with the United States to drop the oil prices. And there was a huge drop in oil prices starting in 2014. And the huge drop in oil prices very much cut into Venezuela's state revenue. So Venezuela had a lot less state revenue. And then, the sanctions made it very hard for them to import things. And that there was a very severe food crisis in Venezuela, spawned by the United States and the low oil prices, that was created at that time. And the USA was doing everything it could to exacerbate the situation. But with Cuba, they were playing nice, because Cuba was no longer considered to be, the main threat. So that's the first factor. The second factor that you want to keep in mind when talking about South and Central America and the United States and Cuba and all of that, is that at this point, it seems that the two parties are playing their favorites, right? The Obama administration, at least Obama in his second term, he focused on signing the Iran nuclear deal, and he focused on establishing diplomatic relations with Cuba. Democrats favor negotiating with Iran and favor negotiating with Cuba. However, you'll notice that in Obama's second term, the United States escalated against North Korea. There was a lot of threats made against North Korea. And you'll also notice that there was, especially in the final months of Obama's administration after Trump won the election, there was an insane escalation with Russia. And it seems like the Democrats at least pretend that they are friendlier to Cuba. They are friendlier to Venezuela and Latin American socialism. They're not. They are friendlier toward Iran and friendlier to China. And they're more hostile to North Korea and Russia. Whereas you'll remember that when Donald Trump took office, Donald Trump rolled back a lot of what Obama did with Cuba. He didn't end diplomatic relations. He didn't withdraw recognition, but he rolled it back. Donald Trump withdrew diplomatic recognition from Venezuela and recognized Juan Guaido, the fake president, for a while. And you'll also notice that Donald Trump, he went and became the first American sitting president to visit North Korea. And he was friendly with Kim Jong-un. And that this is kind of the game that the Democrats and Republicans are playing. Republicans pretend that they, to some degree or other, want to get along better with Russia and with North Korea. And Democrats pretend that they want to get along better with Iran and Cuba and the Latin American socialist countries and China. And it's like a division of labor. And if you look into it, some of it is purely financial. Why is Russia considered to be a rival of the United States? Because Russia is an energy giant. It sells lots of oil and gas, and every ounce of oil, every barrel of oil, every ounce of natural gas that they sell is an ounce of oil and gas somebody didn't buy from BP, Shell, Chevron, ExxonMobil, etc. And it just so happens that the oil monopolies tend to be more liberal, right? The Rockefellers, they're the folks that brought us Planned Parenthood, right? And Margaret Sanger. The Rockefellers are the ones that funded the Kinsey report and Alfred Kinsey and his sex research. The Rockefellers run, and fund modern art, the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. The Rockefeller family, they called it Mom's Museum. The Rockefeller kids called it, and it was purely a Rockefeller funded project. And the Rockefellers and the Ford Foundation and a lot of the big money interests that are tied in with oil tend to be liberals. And not surprisingly, the liberals think that Russia, which is a major competitor on the international oil markets, is more of a threat. Whereas we all know that Donald Trump made a big deal about supporting American industry, and he was into steel tariffs. He wanted to have steel tariffs to protect American steel manufacturing. And what is China? China is a major industrial country. China makes half the steel in the world. China makes computer chips. China at this point is, a major manufacturer. So manufacturers are going to see China as more of a threat. We know that even though Apple Corporation condemned Donald Trump and spoke in woke language, that Tim Cook of Apple was a very good friend of Donald Trump and went to the White House and hung out with Donald Trump all the time. And Donald Trump did a lot to try and suppress Huawei, the Chinese phone manufacturer that makes way better phones than Apple does. Well, that makes sense. If you're Tim Cook of Apple, China is a much bigger competitor than Russia is, right? And it's kind of a short-term division of labor. Now, the other thing that's important to keep in mind is that the people that they call the gusanos, right? That means crawlers in Spanish, but it's the people who flee from Cuba or flee from Venezuela, the people that flee from communist governments. They have a lot of power in Miami. That's why, you have, for example, you have Marco Rubio, right? Marco Rubio is a neoconservative politician who is obsessed with overthrowing anti-imperialist governments. He hates China, he hates Cuba, and he's a Cuban American. And that's because he draws his strength from the right-wing anti-communist communities that are based in Miami and in Florida. And those folks hate Democrats. They consider Democrats to be communists and traitors. And they really, really hate the Democratic Party. They think that, because the Democrats are into labor unions, that means they're communists. They think Obamacare is communism. They're far-right anti-communist nut jobs because they fled Cuba, because the revolution happened and they were on the losing side and they fled. And those folks tend to be Republicans. Okay? Those folks tend to be Republicans. And so the Democrats don't particularly like those people. And so the Democrats tend to do the opposite. While the gusanos, they call themselves, or they don't call themselves that, but the Cuban exile community wants everything possible to isolate Cuba, to weaken Cuba. The Democrats are on the other side. What's also interesting is that the Cuban exile community has bonded very, very closely with the Netanyahu wing of Israeli politics, which is very interesting. and you can speculate about why. I mean, there's a lot of articles in the Wall Street Journal and in other like right-wing neocon publications. They'll talk about how Hugo Chavez was a big supporter of the Palestinians, how Venezuela and Iran are very, very close. And the folks who hate Iran, the Netanyahu Israelis who hate Iran, the Shah supporters who fled from Iran, and the Cuban exile community and the Venezuelan exile community, they are thick as thieves. They are cooperating with each other. They see Venezuela and Cuba and Iran and the Palestinians as being kind of the same entity. And they are Republicans. And Donald Trump and the Republicans pander to those people very hard. The Democrats, on the other hand, see those people as a threat because those people are always trying to undermine their work. And so the Democrats are more willing to negotiate with Iran and more willing to negotiate with Cuba. Whereas the Democrats think that Donald Trump and his presidency is a big conspiracy from Russia. They see Russia as the main threat. And that probably relates to the fact that Rockefeller oil money and energy giants tend to dominate Democratic Party politics. I mean, there's other reasons for this, right? And people speculate about it. In North Korea, right? North Korea, we saw Donald Trump go to North Korea and shake hands. We saw that. And that's partially, we understand, because North Korea is going to open up at some point. That North Korea, the average person in North Korea can speak more than one language. That those mountains in North Korea are full of minerals that are used in cell phone technology. They're already making their own cell phones in-house in North Korea. They're already making their own computers because they have so many of the minerals that are needed that are very valuable nowadays. Those minerals that come from Africa that are very key in computer chips and all that, they have those in North Korea. Your average North Korean can speak more than one language, and North Korea has got a lot of resources, and it's got a very well-educated and well-trained population. And it's only a matter of time before North Korea feels safe enough that they won't get invaded, they won't get attacked, that they will give up their nuclear weapons. And then the UN sanctions that have been imposed on North Korea will be lifted. And it seems pretty clear that Donald Trump and his faction were very close with, there's this very famous, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, this guy, Jim Rogers, the billionaire investor who lives in Singapore, Jim Rogers. And Jim Rogers said that he wants to invest in North Korea. He wants to do business there. And that, people look at North Korea and they can see that North Korea is an economic boom waiting to happen. Well, Donald Trump was saying he wanted to get in on that economic boom. He wanted there to be Trump hotels, on the coast of North Korea. He wanted American companies to get access to some of those minerals. He wanted America to get in on the boom, and he didn't want Russia and China to be the only ones to economically benefit from North Korea's opening up. Whereas, the leaders of the Democratic Party were more concerned about human rights and they hate communist governments and, blah, 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 their usual song and dance. They didn't want to make any money. So there are divisions in the ruling class when it comes to dealing with different countries. But at the end of the day, and I'm just giving you a long answer to your question, F. Shops, about why Obama thawed with Cuba. At the end of the day, none of this really matters. I mean, it matters a little bit, but in the long run, it doesn't really matter because Donald Trump was friendlier to North Korea. Obama was friendlier to Cuba, but North Korea and Cuba couldn't be closer. North Korea and Cuba love each other and they trade with each other. And the USA can attack both of those countries. And different wings of the American establishment can be friendly to both those countries, but they're closer than ever. Right? The Democrats can pretend that they like China more and they hate Russia. The Republicans can pretend that they like Russia and that they hate China. But at the end of the day, Russia and China are closer than ever. Russia's got a lot of energy, oil and gas, and China's got a huge manufacturing apparatus. They need Russian oil and gas. And Russia and China are closer than ever. So it doesn't really matter that the Democrats are friendlier to China in theory and the Republicans are friendlier to Russia in theory. It doesn't really matter because Russia and China are economically connected, right? It doesn't, at the end of the day, Russia, China, Venezuela, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Zimbabwe, all these countries, Vietnam, all these countries that have been locked out of the global economy, all of them are trading with each other. And there's a new economy rising in the world, and the BRICS alliance is at the center of that new economy. And there's nothing that the United States can really do about it. And this new economy is the future. And the only hope for the U.S. economy is for the United States to reorient, to stop defending the ultra monopolies and the British system of holding back economic development, imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. We need the United States to restructure its economy to be part of the new multipolar world, to start trading with Russia and China and Venezuela and Iran. And we need to break out of this international financial system that's trying to hold back development. And that's the future. We need a future beyond imperialism. And the BRICS and the anti-imperialist countries and the Belt and Road Initiative and the Kerch Bridge and all the stuff I just showed you, that's the future. The West is in decline because the West is committed to an economic model that is about holding back economic development, that's about the irrational rule of profits in command. But there is a new economy in the world that's arising where profits are not in command. You have state central planners who oversee economic growth. The way Putin rescued Russia from the disaster of the fall of the Soviet Union was he reasserted state control over oil and gas. And he used the oil and gas revenue to stabilize Russia's economy and ensure economic growth. And it worked. And now Russia has recovered amazingly. They're not suffering from the economic warfare the United States has imposed. They rebuilt their farming sector. Russia's doing great. China, again, they use market mechanisms, but they have 5-year economic plans. They have state-run industries. Vietnam, their economic miracle. You look at what has happened in the Bolivarian countries. I've been into Nicaragua and I've seen the real achievements. They've fully electrified the country. They've redistributed the land. They've created a boom with their micro entrepreneurship program, enabling, with part of their socialist central planning, enabling Nicaraguans to open their own businesses. They've wiped out a lot of the extreme poverty they used to have. I mean, there's many different ways to look at it, but the future of the world is socialism, a planned economy where profits are not in command, but the economy is organized rationally so that growth is no longer restrained. And what we're dealing with in the West is capitalism in its monopolistic stage, imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. And it's becoming unsustainable because of the computer revolution, because in capitalism, when technology replaces human labor, the problem that the worker cannot buy back what he produces becomes exacerbated. And that the tendency of the falling rate of profit and the problem of overproduction, the irrational nature of the capitalist economy, where people become homeless because there are too many houses, where people become hungry because there is too much food, the irrational nature of the capitalist system is holding back the West. And as the computer revolution expands and human labor becomes less and less necessary, an economic system where abundance creates poverty and where labor saving technology leads to impoverishment, that economic system is becoming outmoded. And so we see rising around the world a new mode of production where the economy is rationally organized so that economic growth and technological advancement lead to greater wealth for all. It's a rationally organized economy, abolishing the anarchy of production, the chaos of the market. Instead, rising around the world, we see production upon a predetermined plan. We see a rationally planned economy to ensure economic growth. We see socialism rising around the world. Socialism as Marx understood it. It's not the worker cooperative where everyone gets an equal share of blah, 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 blah. No, it's overcoming the narrow horizon of bourgeois right. It's overcoming the irrationality of the market, overcoming the anarchy of production, the chaos of the market. That's what socialism is. It's having society control the means of production so that growth is no longer restrained. And that's what we're seeing. And, it's not happening in the same way it happened during the Cold War. And you need market mechanisms to strengthen 21st century socialism. But socialism is the basis and the center of the multipolar world and the new economy that's emerging. And the Western system is dying due to the inherent built-in problems of the capitalist system of production and of imperialism that holds back economic development. All right. So there we go. Check out the Morandi Bridge scandal in Italy, which collapsed in 2018. 18. There's a full Wikipedia article on it. All right, the Morandi Bridge scandal. All right, what is the Morandi Bridge scandal? A huge section of the Morandi Bridge broke off during a rainstorm in 2018 when the highways were packed on the eve of Italy's biggest summer holiday, sending cars plunging into a dry riverbed below. 58 people went on trial last year accused of manslaughter and other charges. Interesting, right? Okay. All right. Very interesting. The collapse happened. I'm just reading about the bridge. All right. Interesting. There was an investigative committee. There was NASA satellite research. Very interesting. Sounds like a very big deal in Italian politics. Wow. Yeah, infrastructure is pretty important, right? And what's weird is it wasn't until the rise of neoliberal economics that there was this feeling that infrastructure isn't important. You know, at the time of Adam Smith, it was understood that the government would pave roads, that the government would maintain a postal service, right? I mean, this wasn't, you know, it's in the US Constitution. It says that the federal government will maintain a postal service and that capitalism has always had some degree of, you know, of a state sector to facilitate the market. Why do we have a postal service? Why? Why is the government, the federal government of the United States, in the US Constitution commissioned with running a postal service? Well, that's because of the fact that the mail has to be run independently. If the mail is run by a private company, that private company can favor some over others. And that gives an unfair advantage to some businesses. And so, in order to make sure that the market functions properly, we need the mail and the postage to be run by the state. Because if it's run by a private corporation, that private corporation is going to have its own financial interests and it might favor some over others. And you can't have that. You have to have the mail be equal, right? The roads. Why are roads built? Well, you know, it's not just in the interest of the working class. No one can go and shop at capitalist Walmart if there's not a government road that's been paved for people to drive on to get there, right? And that it was always understood that in addition to the market, you needed things like roads, things like a postal service, things like utilities. You needed these things. You needed them, even though there wasn't a direct profit to be made by some private corporation. There was an understanding that in order to maintain the market, you needed a state sector. Starting in the 1970s, we saw the rise of Milton Friedman and the, you know, Friedrich von Hayek and all of this crazy Austrian school neoliberal economics that suddenly said it's always better if a private company does it. And starting starting after the fall of Richard Nixon, which is interesting because Nixon was a conservative, but Nixon kicked Milton Friedman out of the White House. And Richard Nixon said, we're all Keynesians now. And he imposed the economic shocks. And Richard Nixon advocated for a guaranteed minimum income. And even though Nixon was a conservative who viciously crushed the Black Panthers and viciously murdered the people of Vietnam, and he had no problem imposing neoliberal economics onto Chile, Nixon understood to some degree or other, in order to maintain his conservative base of hard hats, he couldn't promote neoliberal economics. But after Nixon was ousted, after the Watergate scandal, when Gerald Ford came into office, Ayn Rand came to the White House and swore in her protege, Alan Greenspan. And starting with the Gerald Ford administration, we, at that point, saw the idea that it's always better to have private corporations do things. And and we believe this in the United States. We have schools for profit in America at this point, where schools are paid per child that have investors that make profits to educate our kids. We have prisons for profit in America. Did you know this? We have private prisons where private corporations get paid for every person that is locked up. We have private military contractors that fight our wars. Instead of having soldiers fight our wars, we have these private corporations that get paid to send guys out into the battlefield. This is insanity. And this is called neoliberalism. And at no point until the 1970s had anyone ever dreamed of schools for profit, prisons for profit, military contractor corporations that go out and fight our wars for profit. And so this is when libertarians say things like, well, that's not real capitalism in America. The USA is the most free market country in the Western world. We don't have guaranteed health care like every other industrial country does. We don't have guaranteed college. We have, a student loan racket and private colleges and a ripoff where you have to pay for. We are the most free market country. And so if free markets were the answer, if privatizing things and getting the government out of it and having for-profit entities run things was the answer, America would be a paradise right now. But it's not. Our roads are falling apart. Our bridges are collapsing. Our education system that has been implementing more and more neoliberal school choice than any other Western country, any ever before. I mean, we've gone free market in our education like crazy, and the results are very, very negative. So this capitalism as utopia, it's not real capitalism. If we just privatize everything, it'll work. That's bullshit, right? And people just cling to it because it's what they know, because we're all spoon-fed free market ideology. We're all spoon-fed free market ideology our whole lives, right? We're spoon-fed free market ideology. And it used to be we were just told that socialism was completely stupid and never worked anywhere. Now they give us weird degrowth socialism. We're told socialism means poverty, but poverty is good because of Mother Nature or whatever. But we're not given socialist economics. We're not taught about the amazing achievements that the Soviet Union had with central planning. We're not taught about China and their great successes with socialism. We're not ever taught about what has been achieved when socialism has been implemented. And we're spoon-fed free market ideology. So libertarianism is a way you don't have to question what you've been told. You just say, oh, but America isn't really capitalist, right? You just keep believing the free market bullshit we've all been spoon-fed. And you just say, but America must have betrayed it. America must be communist. No, I need you to question what you've been told, right? I need you to not believe the ideology that you've been spoon-fed by the leaders of Western capitalism. The profit motive and the rule of profits is not the best mechanism for organizing society, right? It's just not, right? And we have seen over and over and over again that with socialist central planning, countries can become quite prosperous. Libya, under the leadership of Muammar Gaddafi, had the highest life expectancy on the African continent. When Libya was a socialist country, people from all over Africa were trying to get in to Libya to get jobs. And now people are drowning in the Mediterranean trying to get out of Libya because of the nightmare that has been imposed on Libya by the free market. So, the idea that we just don't have real capitalism, if we just privatize, this is absolute bullshit. All righty. All right. Pete Buttigieg and Kamala Harris seem to be cut from the same cloth. Yes and no. I mean, they both have Marxist fathers that are, Marxist, but not revolutionaries. What's a little bit different is that Kamala Harris is estranged from her father. Her father has denounced her, whereas Pete Buttigieg and his dad were pretty close until his father died. Kamala Harris seems to be motivated by vengeance, whereas Pete Buttigieg is just kind of, you get the impression he's kind of a sociopath. Pete Buttigieg just seems to have no feelings or emotions, right? If you just cut off the top of his face, his eyes don't move. Like there's not much going on there. He's not. He's kind of without emotions, without empathy, without the ability to, he's not all there. Let me just put it that way. He's kind of cold and calculated, and he's, and Pete Buttigieg was a military guy and a military intelligence guy very much. He's not motivated by a desire for vengeance so much as he's just kind of a self-serving sociopath, as Jenny Lin is putting it. He's a little bit different. But what's interesting is they both have Marxist parents who aren't really Marxists, right? Or are part of that synthetic left, that CIA synthetic left, right? That are part of the academic fake Marxism that the CIA pushed to counter genuine Marxism. And that is important, right? And that it seems like both of them were brought up with a left moral code. And that's what's very interesting about all of this, right? It's if you take economics out of leftism, if leftism stops being about the workers struggling to control the means of production, it stops being about controlling the market so that growth is unlimited, it stops being about getting beyond the irrationality of profits and command, and instead it's just about rebellion against oppression, right? It's about breaking the restraints, right? Both Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg were brought up with the belief that right and wrong don't exist, right? That right and wrong don't exist. Right and wrong is for suckers. Right and wrong is something made up by people that want to oppress you. They were both brought up to believe that, which is, unfortunately, that is a very Marxist thing to believe. And Marxists believe that because they were struggling to overthrow feudalism. They saw the church as an institution of feudalism, and that yes, Marxists saw the morality of the bourgeoisie as being hypocrisy. They wanted to overthrow, this makes sense. And it seems like both Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg were brought up to believe that right and wrong do not exist. That if you believe in right and wrong, you are a sucker, you're being manipulated, you're being conned, that empathy is for weaklings. They were definitely brought up to believe that. Kamala Harris, it seems, though, was brought up to see things in a rather vengeful way. And she was brought up to see herself as a victim, to really hate her father. Her mother scapegoated her father, and her father, we don't know exactly what happened, but she really hates her father. She sees herself and her mother as a victim of her father. And she very much wants revenge for that victimhood. Pete Buttigieg, on the other hand, is just kind of indifferent to other people's suffering, indifferent to other people's feelings. He's cold and calculating and self-serving. He'll say whatever, and Kamala is the same way in that they'll say whatever they need to get ahead. Kamala sees it in more of a vengeful way. Pete sees it in kind of a cold, calculated way. But I think the fact that they were both brought up with a belief that morality doesn't exist, they were both brought up, with postmodern thinking. I think that's disturbing. Kamala's record as a prosecutor is far more disturbing. I mean, Pete Buttigieg was a shitty mayor of South Bend, Indiana. He wasn't a friend of the black community until it became trendy, right? The police in South Bend, Indiana were vicious. There was all kinds of police murders and police repression. He didn't give two shits about it. But now that it's all over the news, Black Lives Matter, he's out there. He's, using their buzz phrases. He's talking about mutual aid. He knows. I mean, that's not surprising. And that matches Kamala Harris, except he was never a prosecutor. Right. He was a CIA, U.S. Army intelligence operative in Afghanistan. He's tied in with that wing of the deep state that does the psyops and things like that. So that's something to be aware of. But he doesn't have the record of just vindictively trying to vengefully harm other people the way Kamala Harris does. So there you go. There you go. Right. Both are of that deep reactionary vein that pretends to be left, the kind of what we see in the state of California. Absolutely. Marilyn Ferguson and the Aquarian conspiracy, Silicon Valley and the degrowth, primitivism that we see in Silicon Valley and the desire to control things, the pessimistic, anti-human, Malthusian pseudo left. That's very much the mindset of these people. All righty. All right. Sent a comment through Signal because YouTube is being fascist. Okay. So I'm going to look at the comment that John sent through Signal. All right. Tried phrasing it 3 different ways, but it wouldn't send. We spent the money we should have spent on our bridges, helping Ukraine to try and bring down the Crimean bridge. That's what John McCarthy says. And that's actually good, right? That's a good point, right? Rather than building our own bridges and securing our own bridges, we spent America's money trying to help Ukraine try to destroy the Crimean bridge, which they have failed to do. That's a good way of putting it, right? Rather, we should be building bridges in America, not trying to help Ukraine destroy bridges in Russia. That's a good way of putting it. There you go. There you go. Go and watch yesterday's stream or the stream before, I talk about the word terrorism. Terrorism referred to a political movement in Russia that wanted to inspire a revolution by engaging in acts of explosive violence. Terrorism is the idea that you create change by engaging in very theatrical and public acts of violence. That's the way that one can create political change. I think that's the Marxist understanding of what terrorism, or the term that Marxists generally use, is individual terror. Individual terror is that. It's when you are trying to further your political end with very big, public, dramatic acts of violence rather than building a mass movement. The term is individual terror is generally what Marxists use to describe terrorism. But go and watch the stream, that I did yesterday, or the stream before that. I go into great detail about both of those things. All right. Any thoughts on RFK's VP selection and standing? I should start listening to RFK again because, we're getting closer to the elections. I couldn't stand his Israel apologism. It was pretty bad. I couldn't stand it. But I should go and listen to it again. I see that there are a couple Rumble rants that have come in. So let me answer those Rumble rants. All right. We got, a number of Rumble rants. Goodness gracious. Okay. All right. Lastapach says, thanks for the great show. Well, thank you, Lastapach. Glad you liked it. Thoughts on Macron getting more paranoid currently? Well, Macron is pushing this idea of sending French troops to Ukraine, which is just asking for World War III. Russia has said, French troops in Ukraine will be legitimate targets. If French troops are in Ukraine fighting and get killed by Russian troops, at that point, we have World War III between NATO and Russia. And that's a recipe for disaster. You're on the list. Don't worry. You're on the list. All right. But I got to get through the Rumble rants. Macron is justifying it by saying that Russia wants to invade and march into Europe, which is just completely ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. Russia didn't want to go into Ukraine. They held off for 8 years going into Ukraine. They tried. They gave every chance in the world for the Minsk agreement to just be implemented before they went into Ukraine. Right? The USA violently overthrew the Ukrainian government in 2014, installed a fanatically anti-Russian government. The people of the eastern regions declared independence. They wanted Russia to move in and recognize and protect them, and Russia said no. And instead, they did the Minsk agreements, and Ukraine agreed to start treating those people with decency, and Ukraine didn't do it for 8 years straight. And the Communist Party in Russia was constantly demanding that they go in, and Russia held off, and they held off. And then finally, in 2022, Russia moved in when they felt they had no choice. So the idea that Russia is just itching to invade that's ridiculous. Russia didn't want to invade Ukraine. They didn't want to go into Ukraine. They had to. And they held off for so long. So yeah, what Macron is saying about, we're going to send French troops because it's just utterly ridiculous. Do you think Moscow's concert terrorist attack would influence EU funding of Ukraine? Well, if it can be widely established that the United States and the Ukrainian military were involved, that might sway public opinion to some degree or other. I think there's no question about it at this point that the Ukrainian intelligence services were involved, and that the U.S. government at least knew that they were doing it. Maybe the U.S. government was in on it, or at least, there's no question at this point that Ukraine was involved in making that horrendous Crocus terrorist attack happen. There's no question about it, number one. And there's no question that the United States government knew something like it was going to happen. They got some forewarning because they issued a travel warning. And if knowledge of that can be widespread, and if we can get the public of the EU countries to be aware of that, that may weaken even further public support for spending money in Ukraine. But at the end of the day, the American public doesn't really want to spend more money on Ukraine. They say that America should have priority, especially when our bridges are falling down. And it's the same in most EU countries, right? In France and Belgium and Britain, the population is not thrilled about, escalating tension with Russia. So public opinion is really on our side already. You would never know that from watching mainstream media. You would never know that from looking at social media. But overwhelmingly, public opinion is already against escalating tension and dumping more billions of dollars into Ukraine. Public opinion is with the majority of the people. And I said that when I talked to the Russian president. It's the fact. It is a fact. The American people are not excited about prolonging a war. So there you go. U.S. Parliament in every wing concerns foreign policies more considerably than caring their own people. Truly, you're living in the day of a non-debatable imperialism, says Anoan. Well, we don't have a parliament. We have, the Congress of the United States. And the Congress of the United States, yes, is loyal to protecting an international financial system. It is not loyal to the American people. And I've said that over and over again. Our leaders are defending the global imperialist system of capitalism in its monopoly stage. They're not defending America or the American people or American interests. And that should be abundantly clear. And what we need is a government of action that will fight for working families, that will fight in America's interests. That's what we need. And then no one also says, Jimmy Dore finally mentioned Marxism and the tendency of the falling rate of profit in his Boeing video. Also, Jimmy let a communist speak during his recent live show. The event horizon is indeed arriving. Yeah, well, look, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, right? And I got to tell you, that is one thing that makes our community special. I've been doing these live streams since 2018, and I just keep going. We've been building CPI, and we've learned from mistakes that we've made. We've operated differently, we've adjusted, but we just keep going. If I was going to stop doing this, I would have stopped by now. I am 36 years old. I've been doing nothing my entire adult life but communism. When I was 19 years old, I was selling newspapers and I was doing communism. When I was 22 years old, I was in Cleveland and I was videotaping the police beating up students, and I was selling newspapers and giving classes, and I was doing communism. When I was 23 years old, I moved to New York City, and I moved here and I've been doing communism. I was part of Occupy Wall Street. And 2014, I was doing communism. 2020, I have not stopped building a revolutionary anti-imperialist movement. I have been doing that in my entire life, and I'm going to keep doing it. And I'm not going to back down, and I'm not going to go away. And I appreciate when other people, are appreciative of my work. And sometimes it's easy to do the work that I do, and sometimes it's harder, right? It goes back and forth. Sometimes it's very rewarding, and other times you feel like you're swimming upstream. But you got to just keep going, right? You just got to keep plugging away. You should learn. You should constantly be learning, constantly be getting better at what you're doing. You don't want to get in a rut. You don't want to get in a routine, but you also just got to be in this for the long haul. You got to white knuckle it, right? It's great. There's 300 some people watching this right now. Great. There's been times that I'm on here, there's less than 50 people watching, and I still keep going, right? And, and that's the thing. You got to white knuckle it. You got to assume that you may not get the immediate payout, right? When we went in to talk to the Russian president, I reminded the people in my organization that was not the result of what we did that day, of what we did that year. It wasn't the result of what we did. Like the fact that we were invited, we were trusted enough to be invited into the same room and to stand up and engage with the Russian president. That was the result of years of relentless and consistent anti-imperialism, right? And that often the work that you do, you don't see an immediate payout. Sometimes you do, right? Sometimes you make a video and it goes viral. Sometimes you write a book and it gets really good reviews. Sometimes you get a highlight, but not always, right? And there have been months where it seems like we're making no progress, and then all of a sudden we speed forward. And there are great regressions and there are great difficulties. There have been times in my life where I've not been able to accomplish very much, and it's been frustrating. But there have been times in my life where I'm accomplishing a huge amount, right? And that one thing that it is difficult for a lot of younger people to do, and I have been one of them, is that you feel like the moment you're in is it. You feel like the moment you're in defines everything. And that's not really true, right? That life is very long, right? Unless you die, you keep living. And that things can be very bad in one moment and get very good shortly after, right? And that, you have to learn to have what in psychological terms they call an observer. The observer is the part of your mind that is living in the past, the present, and the future at the same time. You're able to remember the past and be aware of it. You're able to be in the present and see what's going on in the present, but you're also aware that the present is temporary and that the future is coming. And you have to kind of be detached from the moment. There's a famous marshmallow experiment where they gave they gave kids marshmallows, and you can read about it, right? But it's an experiment with how, delayed gratification and the ability to think ahead was, they put a marshmallow in front of these little kids. And they said to the little kids, if you eat the marshmallow now, you only get one marshmallow. But if you leave the marshmallow here for the rest of the day, at the end of the day, it will give you 2 marshmallows. And the kids who ate the marshmallow right then, and the kids who waited to the end of the day and got 2 marshmallows, had vastly different lives. And the kids who waited to the end of the day and ate 2 marshmallows were much more successful in life because they had that ability to go, well, if I hold off for now, I'll get 2 marshmallows. That they were thinking in the future, right? And that is something, and it's not a moral story, right? And a lot of people look at that and they say, oh, those kids had self-control. Those kids were delayed. No, it's not about that. It's about the kids who waited till the end of the day. They could envision the end of the day coming. They could remember what a marshmallow tasted like and how much they would like to have. It's not about delayed gratification. It's about the ability to detach from the moment and look. It's almost like you're in a watchtower or something. You're looking down, right? You're at the top of the Empire State Building. You're looking down and you see the past and you see the present and you see the future, and you're looking at all of them. You're observing them from a tower. That is what you have to learn to be if you want to be successful, especially if you want to be successful in doing this kind of work, because the payout is not always immediate. The difficulties and hardships are often very hard to bear. And you have to be able to be in that watchtower. You have to be able to be up on that high point and observe the past and the present and the future at the same time. And that's not an easy thing to do. And especially if you're somebody who's experienced trauma in your life. When trauma overtakes you, when you get into a traumatized mindset, you forget about the past, you forget about the future, you're overwhelmed with the trauma of the moment. And it's something that you struggle with, right? That when you become triggered or upset by when your traumatic emotions and feelings take over, they can take away your ability to observe the past, the present, and the future, right? So it's just something to think about. Just something to think about. So I'm really glad that Jimmy Dore is talking about the tendency of the falling rate of profits. Really, really glad. I'm also really, really glad that he's talking about communism and stuff. And, I like Jimmy Dore. I've been on his show before. I've met Jimmy Dore, hung out with him before. He's a good dude, and I hope to work with him in the future. And that's the way these things work, and I'm just going to keep going. If Jimmy Dore never spoke to me again, I will just keep going. If I've told people I don't care if CPI gets down to being 2 people and I'm streaming my YouTube streams from my parents' garage, I'm going to keep going. Now, obviously, we're in the opposite situation. At this point, CPI has 150 members. We've got books that are breaking records on Yemen, books in Yemen. I'm going to international conferences in Russia. We're obviously in a very opposite situation. But if things get worse, right, and we're tested, I'm still going to keep going, right? And that is the attitude that has gotten me where I am. And that's the attitude you have to have when you do this kind of work. You have to assume that there's good times, there's bad times, there's hardships, there's setbacks, there's successes. You just have to keep going, right? We're doing great right now. I'll just be honest with you all. We are kicking ass right now. We just had a great trip to Russia and played a very important role. We've got a great, national retreat coming up in Vermont that's going to be awesome. It's going to be great. We're publishing great books. We're about to put out a new textbook that's got the history of the Communist Party and the history of the Workers' World Party and the history of the new communist movement of the 70s in it, and divisions in the ruling class and all kinds of stuff in it. And that's awesome. I mean, we're going in, we're going to be doing great work at the conventions, the Democrat convention, the Republican convention. We're meeting new people. We're kicking ass right now. But sometimes it's hard, right? Sometimes hardships come. Sometimes it's not so easy. And it's important to remember that. I am not Jewish. I have been to weddings of Jewish people before, but they never do this in real life. But in movies that I watch, when they have a Jewish wedding, one of the things they do is when the rabbi or whatever declares the couple, you are now husband and wife, they break a glass in the movies. I've been to one wedding of a Jewish person, and I assumed that they would do that, but they didn't. So I've never actually seen that in real life, but they stomp on a glass when they, and then the band starts playing, and that's like the Jewish wedding tradition. And someone explained to me that the reason that they do that at Jewish weddings is because they want to remember the bad times along with the good times, right? And that some people say that broken glass is supposed to symbolize Kristallnacht and the oppression of Jews and pogroms and stuff like that. And some people say it's just a reminder that, that things break sometimes, not everything goes well, but they, they stomp on the glass and it shatters. And that's that apparently that tradition at Jewish weddings is so that in the good time, in the celebratory atmosphere of the wedding, you're still remembering the hard times that you went through, and now you're in the good time. And I think that's a good way of looking at it, right? It's a good attitude that you have to have about life. So if you want to be in this for the long haul, if you don't want to surrender, if you don't want to get demoralized, if you don't want to give up, you got to learn to, think long term. You got to be aware of the good times and the bad times at the same time. That's my attitude. All right. Why did Biden not repeal the sanctions on Cuba? Why? Well, that's because of the fact that in order to defeat Donald Trump, Joe Biden had to recruit all the neocons from the Trump administration. The reason that Biden was able to defeat Donald Trump was because John Bolton got recruited, was because, a lot of, McCain-like Republicans came over to Biden's side, right? And that Biden essentially made a deal with the neocons. There were some neocons like Mike Pompeo and others that were willing to roll with Donald Trump. But you'll notice that Mike Pompeo has betrayed Donald Trump at this point. You'll notice that John Bolton was, basically endorsed. I mean, not basically, he did endorse Biden in the election, and that Biden had to, bring the neoconservative faction, that very much doesn't want the Iran nuclear deal, that very much wants to, to not improve things with Cuba. It had to bring them into his coalition. And that Biden, Obama, especially Obama's second term, was very much defined by making deals, Brzezinski soft power. And you'll notice that the Iran nuclear deal hasn't come back. The designation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terror that was reimposed by Trump has not been lifted. And that none of the stuff that the neocons in particular were opposed to that Obama did is coming back, because Biden has to keep those people in his camp. Don't the Democrats generally advocate for counter-revolution in Cuba through a color revolution and soft power? And the answer is yes. And you'll notice when Obama went to Cuba, it was caught that the CIA had made a Cuban Twitter that they had set up. They were trying to foment a color revolution, right? And part of the Iran nuclear deal that the Democrats were doing was trying to boost Rouhani, who is a reformist. He's like an Iranian Gorbachev, right? And they hoped to boost Rouhani and the people, in the Iranian Islamic Republic that want to introduce market reforms and dismantle the anti-imperialist apparatus. And they hoped that they would give them a boost. The economy of Iran would get better because of the Iran nuclear deal, and then people would like Rouhani, and then they could further move ahead with counter-revolution. But Trump messed it up, and now the hardliners are back in power. Rouhani will never. I was talking to Iranian folks at the World Youth Festival, and Rouhani will never be back in power. The reformists will never be back in power because of what Trump did. Trump murdered Qasem Soleimani. The whole argument that the reformists made was vote for us, and we will make the economy better. We're going to make things better with the United States. America will treat us better. Donald Trump completely wrecked that, right? And yes, the strategy that is employed by the liberals is they want to de-escalate tensions with countries and slip American influence in there and bolster elements within Iran or elements within Cuba that are more for dismantling. They want to prop up the Gorbachevs of these countries. Yes, that tends to be their strategy. But there's a reason that the anti-imperialist countries will play ball with that sometimes. Is they want those sanctions lifted. They want investment, right? They want that investment. They want people to come in. So it's a two-way street. But in order to get that investment, you have to realize you're doing business with people that don't have your best interest at heart. It's a complicated thing, right? But the strategy of the hard right wing and the Pentagon is to just escalate tensions and kind of, if that means completely obliterating and weakening the influence of the United States in these countries, so be it. They don't care. Peace through strength or whatever. Whereas the soft power strategy of Brzezinski is to slip American influence into these countries, prop up the more reformist and weaker wings of these countries, create enough unrest that they can eventually bring them down. Right? Yes, at the end of the day, both of them want to destroy all anti-imperialist states, but they have different strategies for doing so. And many people have pointed out, Brzezinski, the Democrats, they are the more effective evil. And in the short term, it benefited the USSR to have détente with the United States, to have the SALT Treaty. But in the long term, slipping American interest in there and boostering and propping up the Gorbachev wing, like the American government did, led to the USSR falling. Whereas in the short term, the arms race hurt the USSR, right? Because they had to spend a lot of money on nuclear weapons and such. But the effect of the arms race was to strengthen the hardliners in the military, to kind of rally the people around the Soviet government. So Reagan's efforts kind of had the opposite effect. So it's complicated, right? There's nuance to all of this, right? And at the end of the day, though, right, the answer is not Democrats or Republicans. It's proletarian internationalism. It's winning the working people of the world to socialism. And it's standing in solidarity with these countries. All right. What was it like meeting with young people from Donbass? Well, I had a great meeting with a young guy from Lugansk. I actually have a button that says, I love Lugansk. I did like an interview with him, a conversation that was amazing. And you have no idea you might, but people watching don't have any idea what those people have been through. Those are real heroes, the people of Donetsk, right? They have endured 8 years of persecution. They are fighting out of love for their communities, out of love for their families. They have seen members of their families killed. They have hid in their basements from bombs. You meet people from Lugansk, from Kherson, from Donetsk. I mean, you're meeting people that have lived lives we can't even imagine. And you're meeting real communists. Those people are real communists. And they're Christians also, right? And they love the Russian Orthodox Church. And they love Stalin. And they love Lenin. They've got big statues of Lenin. A lot of Russians don't like Lenin these days. Stalin is wildly popular in Russia. Lenin, not so much. But these folks, they like Lenin. They like Stalin. They love the Russian Orthodox Church. They love the Soviet Union. For them, World War II is a reality because they're fighting Nazis and they're facing persecution because of the language they speak and because of the communities they're from. And they, and these kids are younger than I am. I mean, some of these kids I was talking to, they're, 18, 19 years old. And, and they're in situations that we couldn't imagine and having to take risks and defend their communities in ways that, we have no idea how we would react if we were tested in the situations that those young people have been in. When I meet these young people that have quit university, they were in their first year of college and they quit and they joined the military to protect their neighborhood and their communities after they saw their grandmother get shot in the head or saw the house that they walked by get bombed by the Ukraine. I mean, you have no idea, right? And I mean, you really have no idea. And it infuriates me that their story isn't told, right? Mainstream media in the West is never going to talk about what these people have been through. We don't want to talk about real heroes. We want to talk about real communists, real anti-imperialists. That's the people of Donbass. That's the people of Donetsk. That's the people of Lugansk. Those are real anti-imperialists. They are on the front lines of the battle against imperialism and the battle against fascism. Some of the greatest people I've ever met in my life. So on that note, folks, I do appreciate this community and all that you do. I really enjoy engaging with all of you. So I do want to remind you all that coming up, we are having our National Educational Workshop in Vermont. It's going to be awesome. So I hope that you can join me. I really hope that you can be there. This will be 4 days of education and getting to know you activities. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Anyone who's ever been to a CPI retreat will tell you how awesome it is, how amazing it is. So sign up. We would love to have you there. It's going to be great. It's going to be very, very awesome. So join us. I'm dropping the link in the chat. It's going to be great. 4 days in Vermont. It's going to be great. Did Russia put its nuclear bombers on high alert recently? I don't think so. That was another Rumble rant that came in. I don't think so. But yeah, it's going to be great. So sign up. We would love to have you there. It's going to be great. Yeah, folks, we're doing great work here. I appreciate all of you. I appreciate our community. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Join the Center for Political Innovation. We could always use more members. Come to our 4-day national retreat in Vermont. Yeah, folks, I'll be back. I probably won't be back tomorrow night. It looks like I've got an evening meeting with somebody tomorrow, but I'll probably be back Thursday. So, yeah, here, I'll put on the closing music, and away we go. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.